Meditations with Ryan Slomak.
Hello and welcome to episode 25 of Meditations. I'm your host, Ryan Slomak, and this particular episode goes out to not only the humans, but the robots and the cyborgs out there. I've got Kent Sutherland on the show. Kent is the co-owner of the company Flexibits, an app development firm that designs productivity software for Apple devices, including the iPhone, the iPad, the smartwatch, and the Apple Vision Pro. It's a really interesting conversation where we hone in and focus on what it means to be a programmer, how you identify what problems you want to solve, and just ensuring that you're looking at the world through a specific lens that allows us to understand that relationship between technology and quality of life. Plus, we get to talk about rollerblading, so who doesn't like a nice 90s throwback? So without further ado, let's have a chat with Kent. Here is Kent Sutherland. So Kent Sutherland, tech entrepreneur. You've beaten Angry Birds. We'll cover all that later. But you just recently moved to Washington, D.C. after having lived in Massachusetts and Wisconsin, and have managed to transition your business to all these different places. How has it been settling into D.C. so far?
Well, it's been good. We've been here, what, a year and a half now. I think the thing that we noticed the most, and we've said to people, is it's really nice not having winter or Wisconsin winters. That's one of the things we noticed when coming from Massachusetts to Wisconsin. It was like, wow, there's like 2 months more of winter. And now in DC, it's kind of the other way. Wow, there's like 2.5 months less winter. And so I think that's one of the things that we've appreciated the most. Even, it is a larger city and all of that too, but I think the weather is definitely a noticeable thing to us.
Do you notice that kind of transitioning to these different places, that your kind of approach to your work ever changes based off of where you're living geographically?
In terms of where I am, I don't think so because all of the work I do is at a computer. So if I'm working, I'm in a room at home, just kind of sitting there at my desk. And so I don't feel like where I am matters so much because when you're working, as long as you have like a nice quiet space to think, for me, that's really all you need.
Sweet. I think it's funny that you focused on winter, seeing as you grew up in upstate New York, and we are used to severe winters. It's a way of life here.
It's a way of life, but there's just a difference between Syracuse and Wisconsin in that in upstate New York, yes, it snows a lot, but then it melts and it goes away. Whereas in Wisconsin, once it's winter and it snows a little bit and it packs down to ice and it does not melt until March, sometimes April. And so it would just be this persistent cold that's much colder. For example, in upstate New York, it would be, oh, it's down to zero in the negatives. That's it. That's it's normal but not common. Whereas in Wisconsin, that is just January. Like most of January will be below zero, and that's just how it is.
So we've had rapport for a very long time, so I'm sure that will come up as we talk. But one of the things we've never really talked too much about is your sort of upbringing. You grew up in Syracuse. Your mom worked in real estate. Your dad worked in he was a photography teacher at Syracuse University, right? And I was just curious, what was that household like when you were kind of growing up? What was the spirit of I don't know, your existence as a kid?
Uh, this is a hard question to answer because I feel it's like asking a fish, what is the wetness of water? So like since I don't have any, it is what it is or was what it was. So I don't have a point of comparison really. But I mean, as you've described, my mom was a real estate agent. My dad was a professor and also had some rental houses in the area. And so I guess one thing that was somewhat normal was the concept of there was not set working hours where people would go off to work and then come back at the end of the day. Um, they would both go into the office, but it was not the quite the same sort of strict boundaries of here's when work starts, here's when work finishes. Uh, they It doesn't mean that they worked all the time, although they did work a lot, but there just wasn't like this separation in the same way. But it was, and I think some people would say, "Oh, that's unhealthy" or "That's weird" or something. But for me, I think it was normal, and also you saw that it, it wasn't as if they were workaholics. They still had their lives too. I think it's just a different setup from what I imagine people who work more traditional office jobs, I guess you would call it, might see. But again, like I don't know, man. Maybe that's just my perception from having been brought up once and growing up once. So it could be that everything is just totally average and totally normal.
Well, I guess that's I like it's just really interesting that uh you know to grow up in a household where like there's like the hustle and the hustle is like part of the side hustle and like that can take place at any time is like just kind of like an interesting place. And I always thought about like I don't know, as I was preparing for this and thinking about kind of the jobs that your parents did and the hobbies that they explored or whatever, there was kind of like a spirit of entrepreneurship that like seemed to radiate through your home.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it was fairly normal because just both of what they did involved like you had to figure it out. If you're a real estate agent, you have to figure out how to get the leads and sell the houses and get people to buy houses and you know advertise things well, advertise yourself well. And I never really thought about it growing up just because it was there. And similarly with having rental houses, sometimes my mom would see a house come on the market and she'd go, "Oh, that one's good for us. We're getting it." And then all of a sudden it would become my dad's problem to take care of and manage. But yeah, there's some amount of just flexibility and whatever came up at the time, you try to take advantage of the situation. Take advantage is the sounds like the wrong phrasing. I guess more diplomatic would be being prepared for good opportunities.
I'm curious about your sort of like introduction to computing. Because I know that you had two parents who were like kind of tinkerers, and then you ended up going to the Manly's Pebble Hill School where you had some opportunities to kind of study computing. But like, when did the bug sort of get you? Like, when did you realize that that was a space that you wanted to enter, or at least something that you enjoyed spending time with?
Yeah, I mean, apparently it's been there since before I can remember anything. So my parents have home videos of me sitting in front of a green and black, green and white terminal, like punching in random things into a keyboard. I don't remember doing this. And they also, this is how the story goes, because again, I was like 3 years old at the time, but they bought a Mac 2 for just the house to use. And apparently I would just sit there for hours, kind of just standing on the chair in front of the keyboard and just push a key, look up at the screen, see what happens. And I would do that for until they ran me off, apparently. And so I guess it stuck in that uh, ever since then, and as long as I can remember, there's been a computer in the house, and I just enjoyed playing with it, learning how to make it work, tinkering with it, trying to eventually learned, how does it actually work? It's not a matter of just using the thing, but this thing's here in front of me and what's going on inside. And I think when I started to ask questions about it, my parents would go and try to find answers. I'm like, okay, here are resources in which you can learn how this stuff works. And they hadn't the slightest clue on any of it, but they'd go and find books or find tutorials. I know since my dad was at Syracuse University, he would ask friends either in his school or in other schools and say like, okay, well, what do I do? Where do I get stuff to feed me? And so that was super valuable just because if we hadn't had that, it might not have been so easy to find how do you do all this stuff because this is pre-internet. You can't just punch it into Google or whatever and ask how it all works.
What was one of the sort of like first either applications or like problems you were trying to solve that you remember being like really excited to do on a computer?
Um, some of the earliest things I can remember are, I think in probably fifth grade, just started to learn how to make websites and pretty simple things, just text, images, styling, formatting things using different fonts. So I would put up little websites online, just play with them myself. I also, at the time, I started to learn how to play computer games and then found out, oh, you can actually change these things and, modify them to behave differently, create different graphics, create different story plots in the game and things like that. And so that was another thing that I started doing, which once I started going down that road, you realize, oh, well, you can change more than just the artwork or the text or the storyline. You can actually make the whole game run. Sorry?
No, I was gonna say I remember like in the like 90s having like a Hewlett Packard computer and like finding the I don't remember what game it was, but like finding where the folders were installed for a game and learning that like, oh, there's like a series of JPEGs that are like uploaded to the computer and then like opening them in Microsoft Paint and like coloring over them or something and resaving them in that folder and then playing the game and seeing my like little piece of graffiti exist
Yeah, exactly.
within that
And
structure.
yeah, and I remember, so I was using a Mac at the time, and one of the games that I used to play was called Escape Velocity, and it's a great game. One of those timeless kind of things. And the way that you would modify it is you use this program called ResEdit, which stood for Resource Editor. And this is just what a Mac at the time ran on. It was called the Resource Fork. And you could open up a file and it would show you all of the stuff in the resource fork. And so for this game, it would be all of the data for it. What does the spaceship look like, or what color is something, or what's all of the text in the storyline, and you can go and change it. You can save it, open up the game, and hey, look, it's all different. But the other thing that was in the resource fork was just all of the stuff, all of the code. And so you'd open it up trying to get into the game and mess with that, and you go, oh, look, there's like all of this other cool stuff that you can fiddle with. And it was beyond me at the time, but just seeing that it was there was kind of uh, tantalizing, I guess. It's like, okay, well, there's something here that I want to know more about. And so I think that got me interested in wanting to learn more, kind of gave me a goal of like, okay, well, I know this stuff exists. How do I build it myself? And so then I went and tried to learn programming, and my parents got me some books, kind of just to go through the tutorials. And I think one of the first things that I can remember making was just a really simple tic-tac-toe game, which, now looking back, it's probably spent months building this thing that would take an afternoon to build now. But that was a major accomplishment back then, and making also the art for it and the sounds for it, and then having to make all of the logic for how the game works and detect if you've won. And obviously, it's all trivial looking back, but I still remember doing it. So must have been important back then.
Yeah, how old were you when you built that tic-tac-toe game?
This must have been fifth or sixth grade too, uh, somewhere around there.
I just love your normalcy in tone of this, Ken. It's like, yeah, I just happened to like learn a programming language and build this game on my own and understand user interaction and, be able to do this whole thing when I was, 11.
I mean, I guess at the same time, once you're in fifth or sixth grade, if you really want to do something and you can read, you can you can do it. You don't know the difference in terms of how complicated or not it is, and so you just follow along.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. What in regards to your sort of journey, like at what point did you decide that going to college and studying computer science was the trajectory you wanted to take? Like, did you ever secretly want to become a ballerina or, go into political science? Like, was there anything else? And like, when did you decide this was the thing that you wanted to head to?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I ever really questioned it just because I enjoyed doing it. And so it sort of became the default that I didn't question. Maybe in 20 years I'll wake up and go, oh my God, I just look at all of life that I've missed out on. Um, I I certainly enjoy other subjects, like I did a history concentration and minor. I honestly don't remember what it was now, but if someone had said, okay, you can't do computer science, you need to do something else, I think I would have just been like, okay, I'll do history or something else like that. But at the same time, I think most of my like thought process at the time was sort of in computers and how do you make them do stuff. So it just was an obvious choice to me.
There's a parallel universe somewhere where you're like a renowned pastry chef.
Oh, I mean, it's not too late.
What so you ended up going to RIT to get your bachelor's of science in computer science. Like when you were there and I just jumping ahead, like you then went to Cornell after and at that point started to develop some of the ideas and the technology that would later help start your company. But like when you were at like RIT, what types of projects were you working on, and what types of I guess approaches to computer science really got its hooks into you?
I mean, it was a little bit of everything, but I think one of the things I really liked the idea of, and I don't know where it came from, was computer graphics and computer vision, which are kind of related, but also not. I guess the computer graphics one is easy in that one of the most common funnels of people getting into computer science or computer art or anything is just playing computer games and wanting to make some part of it. Um, and so I think that's the obvious entry into computer graphics. Is like how do you make all of those 3D things show up on the screen and look nice? And I was interested in that. I never really took it anywhere, but I thought it was just an interesting set of problems and puzzles as to how does all of this stuff work. And I think in kind of seeing that, and then also seeing other parts of computer science and like the different subdisciplines, I've found computer vision, which led into machine learning, and that was just sort of how do you get a computer to perceive the outside world? And I feel like it's kind of the inverse problem with computer graphics. And how do you take in all of those graphics from the outside, like a photo or video, and then do something interesting with it or interpret it? And so there was just a good sequence of courses at RIT for both of those things. So I kept taking them because I liked it. It was interesting.
Yeah, and at some point I mean, you and I have talked about this, but like you wanted to be a game designer, you were interested in doing games, and then eventually like this productivity sort of angle hit you. Um, what is it, I guess, what is it about solving like a computer vision problem, for example, where like, you want the computer to be able to understand something about human life or be able to see something. Like what about that really grabbed you, like shifting away from the idea that you're gonna build the next StarCraft, like what about this computer visioning like really, I don't know, spoke to you?
I think it was just it's an interesting problem, and then you can look at it and go, I don't know how this works, and then you have to go and learn about different approaches for okay, how can you make it work? how could you make it work poorly? And then if it works poorly, how do you make it better? And so it's just this iterative puzzle, like never-ending puzzle, because no matter how well it works, you can make it work even better. And obviously, like all of the stuff that I took, because this was 15 years ago now, it is all completely out of date and no one really uses its techniques anymore. And that's fine. Like I don't the world has moved on, but I think it was fun like learning about just the process, learning about learning too. Just like here's the path that people have taken to try to make this stuff better throughout, the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s up till now. And one of the things that in intro computer vision or machine learning courses, it's probably still true, but when I was taking them, they'd kind of go through the history of it and talk about, oh, AI in say the 60s, and people started trying to figure out both computer vision and AI, and they thought, oh, well, we can crack this in a few years. And okay, that was a little bit optimistic because here we are 50 years later and still haven't quite figured it out. And today we're kind of in another one of those little upswings where people are hyper optimistic about what will be accomplished in the next few years. You can see it with self-driving cars and now large language models, ChatGPT, all of that. And we'll see if this is a repeat of the 60s. Obviously, we can do way more now, but will we have it completely solved or not? We'll find out.
Yeah, it's like it's interesting to me because a lot of what computer science education is like understanding where we've gone and understanding how people diagnose problems or like identify problems and then figuring out the programming and the algorithms and the methods of communicating or the peripherals you need to solve the problem is like the secondary part. But being able to like think logically to the most basic building blocks to be able to solve the problem is like step one. And I think a lot of people consider like computer science education like, oh, I'd never be able to study computer science or whatever because that's for people who are really good at math or that's for, people who just like have this they've been standing on chairs since they were 5 staring at computer screens hitting keys and seeing what happens, right? When in reality it's oftentimes allowing ourselves to like re-envision what we want a computer to do, like what's a problem we haven't had it accomplish or what's something that we haven't tried yet, and then seeing from history where maybe that's been experimented with and be able to move forward with that.
Oh yeah, for sure. Like the discipline of computing, whatever you want to call it, is so large. Like there are some people that really just love the fundamentals and like, take it all the way down to like electrical engineering or physics. And they care about like how do the electrons move? And we then get to stand on top of their work and repeat that over and over and over again. And then you can have other people that just think about, well, what is the best interface design or like what is the best color for this button to be and stuff like that. And like they're all completely legitimate things to think about. And that, one of them is not somehow like better or more one might be more fundamental, but it's not, there's no like sense of like, oh, this is fundamentally better to work on this part of the system than the other. And so someone could say, oh, I'm interested in, say, machine learning and AI. That doesn't mean you need to go and become an expert in mathematics, because for the most part, there's other people doing that, and they don't really think about how they think about how it's going to be used, but they're so worried about just making incremental progress and some of the fundamentals. Someone can come in and take, say, ChatGPT or any of the APIs available and create something completely new without having to know all of the decades and decades of work that went into it. And like that's really good. That's kind of one of the things that gets people started is you don't have to know that much to be dangerous, which if you did, nobody would get anywhere. So it really lowers the barrier to entry to like whatever you want, really. It's not like you have to learn everything that came in the past before you're allowed to do something new.
Yeah, or on the flip side, you can be somebody who does specialize in conceptual models, or you can be somebody who does just specialize in programming, or somebody who, is really interested in that electrical engineering component and how we can enhance those things. Like it doesn't have to computer science is, I think, most dangerous when it's like, here, just do anything you want with it. Like when you get to a point where you're able to identify, and when I say dangerous, I mean more like to the individual who's intimidated by jumping into, you know, the industry. um, it like it's permitted to be niche and it's permitted to have a broad understanding, no matter like and I guess follow whichever part speaks to you.
Yeah, definitely. It's for example, I know someone that worked at a large tech company, and spent a large amount of time thinking about how to make one little piece of code, I think, run 2 nanoseconds faster or something like that. And you think, okay, well, what's with that? That seems like a really trivial thing to spend months on. But at the same time, he said, okay, well, let's take those 2 nanoseconds and multiply that by every computer, every phone, every tablet, every whatever in the world, and then by the number of people using them. And that's actually a lot of time once you add it up. And like, might sound trivial, but kind of important. But then, like I was saying, at the same time, so that's really boring to me. I just like can't imagine spending time doing that. And you say, okay, well, there's this other thing that you can work on or think about that might get into your mind that is more your speed. There's just yeah, there's so many different ways you can approach problems.
Well, for better or for worse, Kent, machine learning is something that really kind of spoke to you, right? And you ended up going to Cornell to do your master's and kind of focus on that and focus on ways in which, well, if I please correct me if I'm wrong because my language is probably off, but you were focusing on ways in which you can get computers to understand and recontextualize information from just natural human language. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, I think that was the end result. I mean, what I was trying when I was learning at the time taking these courses, it was really just in some ways more basic than that. And it was how do you teach a computer to just recognize a sequence of events? And so what you're saying with natural language, obviously words are a sequence of words. That's a sequence of events, but it could also be pictures because a picture is just a sequence of pixels. And it all kind of boils down to the same fundamental thing. But yeah, what I was looking at mostly was natural language and how do you get the computer to understand what is being typed or sent to it.
Yeah, so can you give us an example of like a project that you worked on that had a computer try to understand a sequence of events?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the projects I was working on that which eventually led into what I'm working on now was just how do you give a computer a sentence that is something that you want to do or something you want to schedule. And so, for example, someone might write an email that includes text like, we're meeting here tomorrow at 3 p.m. In this location, or, I want to meet with this person, have lunch with them. Just very the fundamentals of like people communicating with each other just to schedule stuff. And so the project I was working on was just, can we get a computer to look at that text and then figure out what does it actually mean? Like, when is it? Where is it? Who's it with? So that it can automatically schedule stuff on your calendar. And so this was what, 2009, 2010. So this is before Siri existed, before Alexa, Google, all of those assistants. So now it sounds like, well, yeah, that sounds trivial, but this was before any of those were out at the time. So it was more at the forefront of what can be done.
And did you have a specific sort of like professor or like group of people that were all trying to solve this problem, or was it something that was like very individualistic to you?
So this particular problem, it came out of one of my one of the courses I was taking. And it was just everyone came up with a different particular problem that they wanted to investigate. And so it was just basically a class project for this course. And so a friend and I chose this project. It was mostly, like I said, structured output. So some people were doing image recognition, some people were doing text stuff. It's been a while, so I don't remember what the other projects were like. But there was all sort of the same, taking the fundamental algorithms to do something.
In tandem with all of your, I guess, official education and all of your unofficial education, you had developed rapport with another computer savvy individual by the name of Michael Simmons, um, who, when you left Cornell, you ended up creating Flexibits with, which is the company that you guys co-founded and still run. How did you and Michael connect initially?
Yeah, so I met Michael when I was still at RIT undergrad. One of the things that I did for fun at the time was I would write code and kind of hack around things, try to see how to make the system better. And so I wrote a program called Checks at the time, and what that did was there was a an app on the Mac called iChat, which you could connect to AOL Instant Messenger and some other chat services and just talk to people. And so what I didn't like how it worked. So I figured out how to reverse engineer parts of the app and then just add features that I wanted. So when I got a few that I was like, oh, well, these work for me, I just put them online to see if anyone else wanted to use it. And people actually did. So I kept working on it. And so this was just kind of something I did on my spare time for fun was I'd hack around in iChat and see if I could make it a little bit better. And if I could, I'd put it up online and people would download it and use it. And so I met Michael just by working on that. He discovered it and would we would talk just about ideas of what to work on. Um, and then eventually that led into working on other projects together. He ended up working at a company in Rochester. So just by coincidence, he was working remotely for this company in Rochester. So we would get together when he was there for work, and I'd work on some projects for that company. I did an internship there, so we just got to know each other over the years. And by the time I was finishing the Masters of Engineering at Cornell, we said, well, we enjoy working with each other. What can we maybe we can make something, start something new. And so we just threw around some ideas of what we could do. I think we made a just kind of brainstorming, right? Make a list of like, here are things we could do. It's not like we started out with this, oh, we need to do this, and now we're going to found the company to do it. It's like, well, we just like making things. And so what can we make that we think is interesting? And I honestly don't remember what some of the other ideas were. Like, but I think the one that rose to the top pretty quickly was this idea of the natural language parsing stuff that I had worked on, and then coupling that with a really nice user interface so that people actually want to use it as a real calendar. And so we took kind of the bones prototype that kind of sort of worked from the class project and then built a user interface for a calendar that we thought people would like to use. It's a little bit more pleasant than the calendars that existed at the time.
Yeah, so like you're what was it in 2000, I think 11 you guys end up releasing Fantastical.
Yep.
And for users at home who are kind of like unfamiliar with the application, it's I mean, still to this day I use it daily. But it's an app that allows you to put stuff in your calendar without having to go to each little field and put it in. So you don't have to say like meeting with Kent and then go and say, this is the time it'll start, this is the time that'll end. I want this to recur every month or whatever. You could just type a sentence in that says, I will be meeting with Kent at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday, uh, every week for the next month. And it will then interpret that language, fill out the fields for you, give you a chance to verify that all that information is correct, and then just put it there, which tends to save you a pretty good amount of time consistently, far more than the 2 nanoseconds that you were talking about before.
Yeah, might be more than 2 nanoseconds. Less often than those 2 nanoseconds too.
Yeah, like what was the sort of like development process for you guys moving forward? Because you obviously had this kind of package that you had been working on. You had this code that you were trying to figure out, and it obviously was already tied to the idea of a calendar. But like leading up to the release of this application, what was the sort of working process that the two of you came up with?
Mostly just experimenting, and we try stuff out. Most of the experimentation was just in terms of the user interface and figuring out how do you make something that is pleasant to use. Because like one of the problems with calendars or just a lot of things in life is it's one of those things that you probably should write it down so that you don't double book yourself, so you can keep track of things, but it's really not like it's not a pleasurable thing to do. People don't go and organize their calendars for fun. Well, at least most people don't. And so what we were trying to think about and trying to solve was, well, how do you just get people to do it anyway? And I think that's one of the things that's been kind of the hardest sales pitches for us is people, oh, well, how is this going to like change my life? And we'll have to say, well, it probably isn't really going to, but we are going to try to make your life just a little bit better and a little bit more pleasant. Because here's this thing that nobody gets up in the morning and thinks, yeah, I really just want to schedule a bunch of meetings, but most people still do it anyways. And so we try to just bring a little bit of joy to how you're doing it. Because if you can just type stuff in and it kind of just works, you're like, oh, that was neat. And maybe you'll do it a little bit more because it doesn't feel like such a burden to do. And then similarly, it's not just about the natural language processing, but it's just how does the entire product work? Can you make it just a little bit nicer to hold, a little bit nicer to use? Does it feel nice when you use the app? And it turns into a bunch of intangibles because you can't say, oh, well, here's the list of things that we do that no one else can do because there just isn't a list like that. But we can say, well, all of the things that we do, it's a little bit nicer and it adds up, and maybe you'll like using it. And fortunately, people agree with us. So people do keep using it over the years and say, hey, this is a nice calendar app to use. And so we've been fortunate to be able to keep working on it and keep making it better.
Yeah, it's fun. I want to go back and kind of talk about the release of this, but I was reading reviews of your app before jumping into this call, and one person described it as Flexibits basically builds apps that Apple should have. And I think that like that's like one thing that oftentimes we get so used to like, well, this is how the interface works, just as like daily users that we don't necessarily ask ourselves like what would make this better. And then when we find that, it's like this eye-opening, like, oh man, imagine how much time I would have saved if this had been this way. Or, like I would actually look at my calendar regularly if the color scheme was something that like was nice on my eyes, or being able to scroll up and scroll back between different days was easy to do, as opposed to feeling like I had to like flip pages in a novel to get to like a new day. Like those things that seem tiny uh end up making the experience, as you pointed out, like far easier to use, but also is something that like once we have that experience we can't imagine or even like remember how awful it was beforehand.
Right. Yeah. You don't want to go back after you've you've been able to do it the way that you see is better.
When you and Michael started working on Fantastical, did you start off with a specific sort of drop date in mind, or was it we're just going to work on this thing until it's ready to go?
No, I think we just kind of tinkered. And at some point we said, okay, this feels right. You know, now we can now we can send it out. Now at the same time, at some point you do have to get kick stuff out the door because otherwise you'll spend forever on it. So it's a bit of an art in terms of trying to figure out when something is ready to go versus not. Because even before, I'm trying to think back, I think we released the very first version of Fantastical in May. I think it was maybe in January or February. We thought, okay, it's done. We can send it out. And then we looked at it and go, when I, and we thought about it. I said, no, it's actually not. It needs some more work. And, the design's not quite right. And we went back and we actually hired a different designer, um, kind of gave it a whole new fresh coat of paint and made some more changes in that. And we did that and we said, okay, now we can do it. And then we released it and kind of prayed that it would do okay. And fortunately it did. But what would have happened if we had sent it out before we kind of second guessed ourselves? Would it have been fine? Maybe, maybe not. Or it's hard to say whether you do something too early or too late. You always want to be a little bit uncomfortable sending something out because if you're not, then you're waiting too long. But at the same time, you don't want to do it too early either. And so that's just it's one of the things that you have to learn in software development is just that kind of getting your gut calibrated well to being uncomfortable in both directions in terms of this feels like it's taken way too long to finish, but also I wish I had more time.
Interesting. Well, apparently you guys had that pretty well adjusted because you ended up becoming the number one app in the App Store. Like at some point in in the drop of this application, like it ended up going like completely bonkers. My tagline for you is that like, Kent Sutherland once fought Angry Birds, like which was the most popular game at the time and was taken over by this productivity app.
Yeah, I mean, we did something correct at that time. So, yeah, we had a combination of good luck and doing something right.
What do you think was that combination though? Like what were the factors that worked in your favor to make that such a, successful drop and such a successful sort of product release?
I mean, a lot of it comes down to Michael is very good at getting the word out and getting people aware of something new has come out and you should check it out and getting people to talk about it and write about it. And that's a big part of it is just getting the marketing right. That being said, you also need a good product to have good marketing. It's not like you can just take something that's mediocre and just get the word out and then the marketing will take care of it. So that's goes back to why we spend a lot of time just thinking about those little pieces of how does this product feel? Can we make it so this thing that you have to like wait for half a second, can you wait less than half a second? Or you have to like tap on three buttons to do something, can we make it two? And you just kind of sit there and iterate on your own product over and over again and try to get it as close to perfect as you can. And so once you have that plus someone who's really good at getting the word out, then you have the chance of getting a good launch. Now, still need to get a little bit lucky, which I imagine we did. I don't know how to measure that part, but it's it's not like there's no luck involved either.
Fascinating. After the sort of launch of the product, I mean, what was your take on it? I mean, you're somebody that I always think about just like, all right, on to the next thing. Like, did you guys give yourself a chance to celebrate? Did you like instantly jump in and kind of do damage control on things that you had realized were, needed adjusting or updating? Like how did you kind of react to that success and then what did you jump into after that?
Yeah, I mean, there's always the damage control part. That's just software. Software has bugs in it, especially anything modern. Just the level of complexity is pretty up there. So we're always, whenever we release something new, we have to go and do some amount of damage control and say, oh, oops, we didn't think of that, or that's not in the right place. So we fixed that. Um, After that phase, then you get to kind of step back a little bit and be like, oh, cool, this all worked out. Uh, I think personally for me, then I just kind of start going on to the next thing and figure out, okay, well, we wanted to do X, Y, and Z the first time around, or second time around, or third time around. So let's try to do that now and just try to make things better. I think the point at which you go, oh wait, people are actually using this, it usually at least hits me much later, where every now and then you would see someone using our app, just like on an airplane or just on the subway, and you go, oh wait, people actually use this thing out in the real world, and that's nice. It's good to see that people actually use the stuff that you make, because when you're building software, in your mind, everything is kind of in a perpetual state of dysfunction or not working. And so when I do see someone use our products and they successfully do it without crashing or something going wrong, it's it's always surprising to me, but also nice, kind of holding my breath whenever I see someone else try to use it, because I think this thing's not going to work, is it? But somehow it does.
How do you react to people using your software? I mean, I don't foresee you as somebody who like jumps in front and is like, I made that, but like are what yeah, how do you react when people are there? Like, do you engage? Do you talk to people who are using it?
No, usually when it's truly on the wild, no. Like I remember one time just being in New York City, just standing on the subway, just kind of zoned out, waiting, waiting to get wherever I was going. I don't remember at all where it was. And someone in front of me pulls out his phone, holds it up to his face, and is like, "Oh, you, you're using Fantastical. That's weird." And then, he gets off the subway, and then life goes on. And it's not like I was going to say anything at that point, but you just have your life interrupted by something you made, and then life goes on. And I don't know, I think that's kind of cool.
One of the questions I had for you is just the way in which you and Michael and the rest of the Flexibits team kind of react to feedback, whether it's um people who are emailing in with specific issues or uh, reading reviews online or sort of just seeing people make YouTube videos about your application. Like, how do you filter the voices and the perspectives that need your attention and the ones that do not?
Yeah, you just do it somehow. Whenever anyone that puts stuff out on the internet is going to get a lot of criticism. That's just normal. And when you make software that you ask people to pay for, you hear a lot of criticism. And so we're used to hearing that part. And so a lot of what we do is just try to listen to everything that people say and kind of check your ego and hear them complaining and go, okay, well, they're complaining. Maybe it's correct, maybe it's not, but just like kind of absorb all of it and don't write things off immediately. And also, if someone says, "Oh, I have this great idea," and it seems like a great idea, you also don't jump on it immediately. But once you have enough people saying stuff, you kind of figure it out over time. You hear the feedback, you hear the common threads, you hear people asking for things over and over again, or you hear people not saying stuff, and you try to kind of fill in the gaps of what that means. If people aren't complaining about this one thing, does that mean they're using it successfully and not complaining about it, or there's some hole here where people actually haven't identified something's missing? Uh, so there's sort of just trying to absorb all of that and then make a good decision about whatever it is we do next. And then at the same time, we also just try to be really obsessive about making people happy, in terms of, if they email us and say it doesn't work, we try to fix something really fast so that it does work. And occasionally people will email us and say, well, hey, why doesn't it do this one very specific thing that would work for me? And sometimes we say, well, thanks for the feedback. But sometimes we go, you know what, it's really not that hard to just add a little option for just this one person, and that makes them really happy, because they never expected for some random company somewhere to take their suggestion and then have it out 2 weeks later. But we try to do that for people too, when feasible, to to also just make people's lives better, get things working the way they want to.
Can you give an example of a time at which you guys have received feedback that you then had to implement, like you felt it was a necessity?
Felt it was a necessity. We've probably had one. I'm having a hard time thinking of something right off the top of my head. There are always little things that may sound trivial. For example, someone might write in and say, I have this particular type of color blindness, and we still try to make design everything to be very resilient to different types of color blindness, but you can't get there 100% of the time. We go, oh yeah, you're right. Here's a way to fix that. Or sometimes it's much quirkier, and people will go, well, I like seeing my calendar that has 7 weeks at a time. And you think like, why would you want to do that? But well, here you go. Here's how you can do it because it's one line of code for us and it's no skin off our back. So, you know, there you go. And they're happy. And they might be the only person in the world using the app that way, but that's just fine because it works for them.
That's awesome. Part of the reason I'm intrigued with the feedback is because, you know, a lot of people will release an application and it just exists until you're going to move on to the next thing. And obviously with like calendar and productivity software, the goal is that people are using, let me rephrase, the goal from the user experience is that you're going to keep using this thing forever because you don't want to have to keep relearning new ways to just keep your calendar in line or, use a word processor or whatever. You want to use the same thing moving forward. You don't want it to change a ton because you want to just have a good experience with it. You want it to be part of your daily routine. You don't want to have to think about it. And when you're releasing a calendar app and you're saying, hey, it's this amount in the app store, boom, you own it, it great, but people need to keep using it and the world is going to change and it has to evolve, which is why feedback and sort of like revamping Fantastical is such an important part of how you guys operate. Like it's not set it and forget it. It's set it and then constantly reflect, constantly reflect, constantly reflect. And then eventually you guys shifted your business model because of this and ended up becoming a subscription based application as opposed to a single purchase. What were the factors that you guys kind of took into I don't know, just into Flexibits to kind of talk through to make that transition? And then what was it like to make that transition for, communicating that effectively to users and getting people to understand that like, there's so much maintenance that is happening with this application that things have to shift.
Right. Yeah. You've asked a really complicated question. Um, I think one thing is just in software in general, especially the last 10 years or so, the pace of change has increased to a point where every year Apple or Google or whoever else are releasing these gigantic new updates, and people could just kind of expect that to be the way the world is. Last year your phone couldn't do this thing, and then now your phone can all of a sudden, talk to you or understand what you're saying or understand it better or, create images for you or who knows what. And so there's this expectation that things are always changing, things are always getting better. But also because everything is changing so fast, even standing still can be pretty difficult in that just keeping software running. It's not like software that you wrote in 1980 you could just walk away from, and then today you can fire it up and it works. That's nobody really expects that. The problem is that's happening more and more often now, and that something that's like 2 years old might not work. And so that's one component of it is just there is the maintenance of software, but not only the maintenance, but also just making things better. I think traditionally you would make, Fantastical 1, and then you would make Fantastical 2, and then Fantastical 3, and you would try to make a new version and sell it as an upgrade or a completely separate purchase. And that's how you would make your money, because at the end of the day, we have to make money to survive to do this. And that way of doing things has become harder and harder over the years. One reason for that is just the way that the app stores work. It's hard to give people a discount if they purchased the previous version. And so that would leave a bad taste in people's mouths and say, well, why am I paying a whole new amount each time for this? And at the same time, as you're trying to add more stuff, you're then having to maintain all of it, figure out how to support it, and make stuff better. So you like have all sorts of different problems running around at the same time. And so that's sort of why the world and why we eventually moved to this model of, okay, well, just if you're using it continuously, you can just pay for a subscription. If you don't want to use it anymore, you don't have to pay for it. And that sort of aligns the incentive that people have. Now, obviously, it would be great if you could pay for something just once and then never have to pay again. Like, I think everyone would love that as a consumer. I would, anyone else would, because that's just, if you can get something cheaper, that's great. Um, but at the same time, if you're using something every day and relying on it, you do want it to work and you do want it to keep getting better. And so that way, people who do use their calendars a lot or just want to have something that works, they keep paying for it periodically, whether it's once a year or once a month. And then we also show to them, hey, look, here's how we're making it better all the time. And so people can go and look back at all of the new features we've added, how we've made it work slightly better, work slightly faster. Here's new things you can do with it. And for the people that don't want to pay, they can use the free version, which has fewer features. And there's also just, we're competing with Google, Apple, all the other companies that have free calendars. And so when you're competing against something that's free, you really can't you can't really lower the price to try to compete and try to beat Google or Apple because obviously they're going to win. They have the infinite war chest to do whatever they want. And so the strategy we take is we find the people that kind of care about having this kind of quality or this kind of feature set, and we try to make them as happy as we possibly can, and then they keep using the app.
I mean, I just think it's fascinating in the sense that, like, I remember when you guys were making this transition, you and I had talked about the fact that, like, people are getting more and more comfortable with the idea that, like, subscriptions are the wave of the future for so many different things. But to be able to, like, I don't know, transition a huge demographic of people over to this model, where the place that we're seeing subscriptions for the most part are like, gyms where people have had them forever, or like, the super exciting streaming service where you can check out the new Henry Cavill movie or whatever it is. Like, to be able to transition your product line, I think is just like a true testament to like the value that your customers have found in this type of productivity software, and this simple way of keeping your or seemingly simple way of just like keeping your calendar in order.
Yeah, and that's what I say to people sometimes at the end of the day is that we're not asking for we're not asking for that much money from any one individual person. And if you think it's too much, then like I completely respect that decision. And there's a ton of free calendar apps out there to use, and they're pretty good. Um, and I don't feel like I have the need to convince every single person on the planet to say, oh, you should really be using Fantastical and our apps because they are the one true way to do it. But at the same time, I think we do a pretty good job. We make some pretty good products, and it's sort of like, hey, if you want to join us on this journey and use our stuff, we would love to have you. And fortunately, lucky for us, enough people agree with that we're able to keep doing it.
Yeah, and you were like, it's not just the calendar, right? You guys have an application called Card Hop, which allows you to like be able to easily pull data from your contacts, where normally you might have to, go into your contacts and look up the specific person and then click their information and be able to figure out when their birthday is. And instead, you can just say like, "When's Ken's birthday?" and it will pop up that information, or help you kind of like hierarchically organize all these things. Um, like what? I guess my question is like, when you're figuring out this like ease of life scenario and you're adding all this functionality to these things that people are like using all the time, like How do you determine this is something that needs to be a new application versus something that's going to be existing infrastructure within the software that you already have clientele for?
Right. I mean, so like you said, CardHop does kind of the same thing for contacts that we tried to do for calendars with Fantastical. We we try to be careful about adding too many things or doing too many new products because we're a small company. We can only do so many things. We're like I said just a minute ago, we're not Google or Apple where we kind of have unlimited resources to try to do everything all at once. Um, so when we think about new features or new ideas, we try to put them together into, we try to think of them from the lens of, okay, here's what we've already done. Can we make this a logical extension of something we've already done? And there are times when we think of things that we think are good ideas, but we go, we can't make this fit. And, you know, unfortunately, we'll just like stick it on the shelf or not do anything with it. And it doesn't mean that we wouldn't like to make a new product or do something completely different, but you also have to make choices in terms of what are you going to work on? There's only so many hours in the day.
You talked about the sort of like rate of technological change a few minutes ago, and the fact that you have this, this push for better or for worse from the people who are making these operating systems or making the devices that your business is built on. But they're also coming out with different peripherals, on a fairly regular basis. I mean, Fantastical is starts off on start off on the iPhone, and then eventually you go for the iPad and the um, the laptops and desktops as well. And then eventually, the Apple Watch comes out, or in this case, like the Apple Vision Pro comes out. Like, how are you guys gauging which peripherals you need to jump on? You need to be a part of that sort of next technological movement.
Yeah. I think so. Historically, we've always been Apple people. We've used Apple products. I grew up using a Mac. Um, even before Apple was the company it is now. When I was growing up, Apple was everyone said would be dead in 6 months, and somehow here they are today. Um, so one of the things that Apple has done pretty well is when they make a new product, they figure out how to leverage all of the existing stuff they've built. And so when Apple creates the Apple Watch or the Vision Pro or something like that, they also have a pretty coherent story of how to bring over all of the existing things, all of the apps, all of the tools, all of the products to that new platform. And so since they've done a pretty good job of it, we've been able to just quickly go, oh, look, here's this new platform. We can get our existing product up and running, and then let's think about what new things does this do? Is there anything interesting we can do with it? And we try to adopt those things as best as possible and then get something out the door. So I think part of the reason we've been able to move to new platforms within the Apple ecosystem is just that Apple does a really good job of thinking about that and making it so that people can reuse all of their work and tools and code and technology and stuff like that.
How does your approach to solving those problems change?
Well, in terms of the approach, it's kind of the same approach in that we try stuff out and try to just make intelligent decisions and make good guesses about how is this going to work. For example, with the Apple Watch, it comes out and you go, okay, well, there's this tiny little screen. People aren't going to be using it as a full computer, which sounds obvious, but then, okay, then what? What can we do that's useful? That's both actually useful to someone, but not too complicated, but also not too simple, and just finding that right place to sit in terms of the what you can do with it and making all the right trade-offs in terms of complexity, but ease of use and all of that.
Yeah, like what was an idea that you decided to implement into the Apple Watch that, maybe you hadn't thought of before?
So some examples here, like I was saying, an Apple Watch isn't a computer. And so let's say you want to see your full calendar, one event every day. Well, there's not space to do that. And so you might think, oh, okay, well, you just can't do anything, but that's going too far the other direction. So we do a lot of work creating different mock-ups and designs of, okay, well, how can we get all of this information into a little screen that's on your wrist that's still useful? And so we'll come up with, say, like new clock faces or new ways to visualize all of your upcoming events. And a lot of those just don't go anywhere. And we'll try them out and throw them out. And some of them do, and we add them in. Like for example, we came up with a little like graph of your day, so you could see throughout your day, here are the things coming up, and you'd sort of see the little blobs representing your events moving forward through time. And you can't see all of the details, but you can kind of glance at your wrist and go, okay, well, like there's something coming up. If I care more, I can either get out my phone or spend some more time like tapping around on my wrist to get to it, but it's still there, quickly available. And so it's just kind of thinking through how do you make these quick, well, take a long time to think about how to make these trade-offs so people can quickly get the information they need.
Awesome. And you guys developed an app for the, as I talked about earlier, the Apple Vision Pro, the sort of, augmented reality, virtual reality system that they just came up with. And when Apple was getting this off the ground, you guys were invited to go to Silicon Valley to be able to test this stuff out, and see the technology firsthand and kind of be able to peek behind the curtain. And then when it was released, I read one article that said that like Flexibits has turned the Apple Vision Pro into a productivity machine from day one. Like how now that you've got this whole sort of like fully immersive thing, like we don't normally think about VR as being like a really great place to look at your calendar. Like people want to play Beat Saber or they want to, like watch a movie or pretend they're on a roller coaster. Like the idea of like I'm going to put on these goggles and instantly like look at what I'm having for lunch at 2 o'clock. Like is not what people would normally do with that. Like how did you guys like tackle this like new unlimited landscape for calendars?
Yeah, and so I think one thing we're thinking about this, and like you said, it's probably unlikely that someone is using their Apple Vision Pro with the goal of checking their calendar. And so we sort of thought about it a different way, which is if someone's playing Beat Saber or doing whatever it is they're doing, watching a movie or whatever else, maybe they want to quickly drop into their calendar just to check it. And so that was one of the ways that we thought about. We did go in the direction of, well, what if we could just reinvent calendaring in 3D space or something like that? And maybe we still will. It's still too early to say, but because something as big as the Apple Vision Pro comes out, and you only have a certain amount of time to come up with something, so we said, okay, well, we're going to make it work well at least, and work very nicely, and feel like it's a first class citizen of kind of the Apple Vision Pro ecosystem. And so we took that approach of just let's make it what we have and make it work really well. And we'll see where it goes. We'll keep thinking about it, keep iterating on it. But the Apple Vision Pro has only been out for 4 months now, I think. So still really early in terms of where this platform goes. And so we're kind of interested to see what develops as people figure out how they're using these things.
Yeah, so it's been 4 months that it's been out in customers' hands. What was your lead up to be able to release a product for it? Like, when did you guys first know, like, hey, we're going to jump on this? And at what point did you have to, like, how much time was there before you had to have it released?
Well, the Apple Vision Pro was announced, I think, June of last year. And Apple announced that they would be open for developers and released a developer's kit, just how you can run it on your computer, like simulating it. And so we were able to just use that and start building a version of it for how we think it would work if you haven't. And so then as the release date came closer, you just keep using the simulator over and over again to do your best to imagine it because you don't have one, obviously. And so when it comes out, you then use it, hope that it's as close to that reality as you can and then make any changes that you might have missed. But fortunately, like I said, Apple's developer tools are pretty good. So we were able to kind of get pretty close to what we wanted the first time around.
Yeah, I think it's just really important for listeners to know that like when you're developing something for an Apple Watch or for an Apple Vision Pro prior to its release, you're not getting this thing 6 months early to be able to run tests on. Like you have software that is mimicking what it can and should be able to do. But you're also kind of in the dark and kind of trying to anticipate problems that like the world doesn't know it has yet because you're only seeing this thing from this like one computer screen that should hopefully give you an idea of what the technology will be able to do. How like I guess when you started developing Fantastical, like you had the device in your hand, right? Like you were able
Right.
to pick up a phone, but like where I guess what's that gray area between what the simulation can do and what the actual final product can do? Like, I mean, is there a moment where like Michael is running to the Apple store, buying one of these as quick as he can, then going, throwing it on, and being, "Ha, we got to make these 7 changes before the public knows." Like, what's that gray area like?
That occasionally happens. I think fortunately for us, we weren't doing the kinds of things that are, say, the most cutting edge 3D rendering or something where there's really high risk where you're not quite sure how it's going to pan out. And so most of our concerns are about, say, like readability of text and is it easy to see? Like, is the contrast of the text and all the colors correct and things like that? And so there tend to be fewer catastrophic problems, and it's more, oh, we didn't quite get it right, and we can go back and make a change to fix it. And honestly, probably most people don't notice, but the kinds of things that we do notice and we try to fix them. And there are people that do notice when they're wrong and they tell us and we appreciate it and then we go back and fix it. In terms of when new devices come out, it's not very often that something like an Apple Vision Pro comes out where it's just this whole new category of thing. And so that was definitely different for us in terms of it was a little bit more uh, hand wringing, I guess, about what exactly would the final product would look like. But fortunately, Apple's developer tools they're pretty good. So that that took us a long way. And plus, just once you've been doing it for a while, you do learn kind of how things are gonna end up. You can make a pretty educated guess.
Well, I want to thank you for going into those procedures. I have one more sort of line of questioning for you, which is completely on the opposite end of the spectrum, which is on top of being a technologist and a computer scientist and a business owner, and somebody walking the streets of Washington, D.C., you're also a huge rollerblader. You're somebody who like really enjoys rollerblading, and I'm curious about like when that bug bit you. When did you figure out that rollerblading was like your favorite form of exercise?
I think it, probably sometime in elementary school, second, third grade, just, you would, I imagine a lot of people my age or older or younger, it's just a pretty common thing to go to the roller rink as like a school party or, some sort of function. It's like, oh, well, you go to the skating rink and you roll around for a couple hours and eat pizza or whatever. And while in doing that, I think one time, either before or after, you found out, oh, there are people here that do speed skating, and that looks fun. So let's try that out. And so I got into that when I was fairly young, and then you know did that throughout high school, stopped in college and afterwards just because you get busy with other things. But after I graduated from college, I had my skates and I thought, oh, well, maybe I should try this again because it's been a while and kind of got back into it and just started enjoying the sport and being able to go out and just skate for miles. It's just a therapeutic thing to do and not be at a desk or at a computer. And so I've just always loved doing it and yeah, keep doing it just because it's really fun.
Yeah, and like, you're so much outside of the roller rink, Kent. I mean, like to put it in perspective, annually, you do the Athens to Atlanta, the A to A, which is an 87-mile jaunt uh, in a day, just going 87 miles on your rollerblades between two cities in Georgia. How'd you get involved with that? It looks like it's been going since 1982, and it's you're on the website. Like, how did you get involved with the A to A?
I think this is just one of those things that I always knew existed. I'd heard of it, even being a kid. And I think once I got back into the sport, I I saw that I saw it and I was like, oh, I remember this. That looks like it would be fun to do. And so when I was living in Boston, I met a couple other people that did it every year and thought, okay, like I'm old enough now that I can actually make these sorts of choices to go and do these things, whereas as a say 13 or 14-year-old couldn't do. It so just did it one year and it was really fun. And so I just kept going back for more and going and skating and having a good time. And so yeah, for me it's just like a one of those things you do every year that you look forward to because it's enjoyable.
Well, so for somebody, if somebody's listening and they're like, "That sounds bonkers. I want to do it." What kind of conditioning does one need to do in order to be able to roller skate from Athens to Atlanta?
It really depends on what your goals are, and that there's a really wide range of people, and like some people they do it and they want to do it as fast as possible, and some people just want to survive. And I think anyone that does any sort of distance event, skating 87 miles or even like running a marathon or biking 100 miles or even 100 kilometers, it's just one of those things you kind of take it a mile at a time, a kilometer at a time, and just keep going. And it becomes a mental thing as much as anything else. Obviously, you need to be in shape for it, but I think there are lots of people that you might not expect they were doing something like that, and they finish it at the end. And yeah, I think it's anyone that attempts these types of things, I think is really great, just because you can find surprising types of people doing all sorts of crazy endurance sports,
Including people programming your productivity apps in their spare time.
yeah, including that.
What just last question, which is the when you did this last October, like what are your sort of routines to make sure that you're ready to go by the time, that event hits? Like what do you do leading up to that event to make sure you're going to be comfortable?
So for me, it's usually just getting in the time to practice and do the miles. You kind of a rule of thumb for me is if you can skate 100 miles in 1 week, then you can do the 87 miles in one day, and you'll survive. And I think that's true for most other people there. They kind of try to hit around that.
Awesome. Kent, thanks so much for joining us. Is there anything that we haven't covered or anything that's sort of on your brain that you wanna make some space for before we depart?
Oh, I don't think so. Just thanks for the conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on the show, Kent. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Kent Sutherland, the rollerblading app developer you didn't know you needed in your life. If you're interested in checking out Kent's work, check out Flexibits, check out Fantastical, see what it does. It's cool stuff, and now that you have this background perspective, maybe it'll enlighten you a little bit more to the way in which other apps in your life help or hinder your existence. Moving forward, though, we have some pretty cool stuff going on. On July 17th, episode 26 of Meditations hits off. And if you think about math real quick, if there's 52 weeks in a year, the show comes out every other week. That means that next week celebrates the 1 year anniversary of Meditations, which is really exciting. So on July 17th, we'll have Jaleel Campbell here to celebrate that monumental moment. Jaleel is a digital artist who elevates vector artwork elevates digital art to a way to really show off his personal experience that has gotten acclaim from all around the world. He's done a number of different art galleries. He's always selling his art for different commercial purposes, most recently to soul singer Patti LaBelle for a collaboration, which is really cool, and a puzzle collaboration that he did where you can actually find the Jaleel Campbell puzzle collection in Target stores around the country, which is fascinating. So if you're interested in getting a behind-the-scenes look into the life of a digital artist, tune in on July 17th for episode 26, the one-year anniversary of Meditations with Ryan Zlomek on all your favorite podcasting platforms. As always, if you like what you heard and you're new to the show, please go check out the back catalog. There's interviews with stop-motion animators and voice actors and inventors and game designers and everything in between, and maybe something will speak to you. Also, if you want to help the show, please go to your favorite podcasting platforms, write a review, give it a follow, and share it with other people on social media. You can also find me on social media, The World of Ryan Zlomek, on Instagram and Facebook, where I like to hang out and digitally high-five all those around me. Thanks again to all the listeners out there, even the robots and the cyborgs. We appreciate you this week. Have a wonderful rest of your day, your week, your month, your year, your lifetime, and don't forget to make space for conversation because you just might learn something. Stay awesome.